Welcome to High Point University's premier life skills seminar featuring HPU's in-residence leaders and other global change agents.
So exciting to be with all of you today. I have not been on campus since graduation 2016. My middle son Trevor graduated that year, and so this is my first visit in my new role with you all, and I'm really excited. You know, I realize that the audience here is vastly different. Some of you are getting ready to graduate. Some of you had internship experiences. Maybe some of you are brand new freshmen and you're really thinking about what you're going to do this weekend. But what I talk about today, I want you to tuck this away because you're going to need it at some point. And I don't know if it's at the end of this semester and you're going to get a job or if it's 4 years from now. But I think what we're going to talk about, you'll find helpful. The first thing I want to do is tell you a story. And this is my friend Rudy. When Rudy was starting out his career, he was a doctor in Mexico. At the age of 30, he was given the opportunity to move to the United States. Now, he had to give up his medical practice to do that, but he wanted to create a better life for his family. So he came to the U.S., but since he wasn't able to practice medicine here, he went to work as an hourly employee at a Chick-fil-A restaurant. Right there on the border, in the border town in McAllen, Texas. Any Texans in here? Okay, good. We got some Texans. Okay, so you know where that is. At some point along the way, it became Rudy's dream to become a Chick-fil-A franchisee. And he submitted his application. But, you know, something special really stuck out about Rudy, especially what he had sacrificed and how hard he had worked. But he struggled with his English a little bit, and it was hard for him to really communicate well his experiences. So when the list of potential franchisees came along, rarely was Rudy ever at the top of the list. After working for 10 years as an hourly employee, we had the opportunity that we wanted to consider Rudy for. He didn't know it at the time, but at that very moment when he came to that first interview, is the worst performing Chick-fil-A franchise in the chain. And we were trying not to close the restaurant. We were looking for a franchisee. And we started talking about this guy, Rudy, and how long he had been trying to be a franchisee, and maybe this would be his opportunity. So we called him in for an interview, and his final interview was with me. And after we talked, I offered him, and by then he knew the performance of this restaurant, I offered him what was the worst performing store in the chain. And he turned to his wife and he translated, because she didn't speak any English. She was at the interview, and he translated what I had just said. And he had tears in his eyes and she began to cry. And I thought, oh no, this guy has worked 10 years. He left Mexico. He came here for this opportunity, and I've offered him the worst store in the chain, and he's disappointed. But that actually wasn't the case at all. They were crying because they were excited that Rudy finally had his opportunity. Rudy took over this location and relocated his family to San Antonio, and he performed brilliantly. He raised sales and profits like double-digit times over percentages. It was an amazing performance. And in that first year, he won the highest award offered at Chick-fil-A called the Symbol of Success. Well, the second year, he repeated the performance. The first year was the use of a brand new Ford automobile. The second year, he won the title to the car. And while he has a huge heart for his community and is selecting great talent, and he's building a great culture for his organization, Rudy Martinez crushed his career, and I want you to crush yours too. Now, I mentioned to you about being at different stages. Well, when I was leaving college, I was a journalism major, and I wanted to be a writer. Well, there were a couple of problems. I wasn't going to be able to do that at the time because, A, we were in the middle of a huge recession. Jobs were scarce to begin with, and certainly for aspiring journalists who had no life experience that anybody really wanted to write about. And so I thought advertising would be the path for me, and so I set forth looking for an advertising job. Now, back then, we found jobs in the classified section of the newspaper. It's a big group, so I won't ask you how many times any of you have ever looked at classifieds, but it was section D, and every day I would go out to the driveway, pull the paper out of the plastic bag, turn to section D, and scour for a job opportunity. Well, finally, someone invited me in for an interview, so I had to get ready. This was the 1980s, so it was a pinstripe suit with a pencil skirt and a ruffly brown blouse and a perky bow and a perm. Well, except the perm was a disaster. Now, perms aren't real popular now, so you might not know this, and I didn't know it at the time, but I was going for my big interview. I got in a perm, and what I didn't know is that you're not supposed to wash your hair for a few days after you get a perm. I hope you're laughing at the perm story, because maybe you know what happens next. But I did wash my hair. It stuck straight up, frizzy, all over my head. Now, if you've ever seen a poodle that's getting ready for the dog show with its hair all frizzed up, it looks something like this. And I'm pretty sure that's why I didn't get that job that day. However, I continued to check out those classifieds, and finally I was thrilled to land a job with a small company with an opportunity in advertising. I had high hopes and determination, and I went off to my first real job. Well, after a few weeks, I was miserable. The culture was toxic. The boss treated women terribly. It was appalling. And it definitely wasn't as glamorous as I thought the advertising world was going to be. So for 18 months, I stuck it out, and I collected lots of stories that ended up in my books later on. Because company culture was my number one concern, people started telling me about the small restaurant company in Atlanta that sold chicken sandwiches. It was really small back then. In fact, it only had 150 restaurants and did 175 million in revenues at that time. And they were closed on Sunday, and they had a great culture, and I thought, that's the kind of organization I want to work for. So I applied for a job at Chick-fil-A in advertising. Fortunately, by then, I had learned to tame that poodle look, as you can tell. And after a long process, Chick-fil-A did offer me a job, but not in advertising, in human resources. It was a direction that I didn't see myself pursuing, but somebody else saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. And I want you to pick up on that lesson, because that might happen to you someday too. Don't be afraid if somebody finds something in you you hadn't imagined. So what's my point to all this? Well, here it is. You know, many people think I'll get into a good job, I'll in my field, I'll get great training, I'll be promoted early and often, and I'll have time to travel, pursue my hobbies, and if it doesn't work, I'll change jobs. I know that's what my three sons often think about. But you know, most people have an overly idealistic, Most people have an overly idealistic view of work. I did. I thought my career would be straight up and to the right. I didn't realize the challenges that would come my way, and I really didn't have any idea of how to navigate them over the long haul. You know, many challenges come up along that can't be anticipated. I mean, what do you do when your company lays off a bunch of people? What do you do when the whole company goes virtual because of the pandemic? What do you do when somebody's gossiping behind your back and it's hurting your career? What do you do when you've stalled out and you don't know what to do next? If you're too idealistic about the pathway, then you may end up disappointed when you face challenges early in your career. And this kind of idealism leads to some interesting statistics. 1/3 of young adults don't even make it 1 year on their first job. I made it 18 months in mine. 58%, and I believe this, 58% of people would trust a total stranger over their own boss. And this one in 4 U.S. workers are considered quitting their job at any time. That might not be what you're thinking about when you're excitedly pursuing your career in college. I don't want any of those statistics to be you. After 35 years of working in HR, I saw a lot of people get sidelined. And to be honest with you, I had my own setbacks. Some were of my own making, and some were completely out of my control. Most people underappreciate the challenges they'll face as they navigate their careers. The tools exist, but often you don't learn those at school. except at High Point because it's the premier life skills university, right? You do learn a lot here. But a lot of times you just don't learn it till you get that experience. But you know, all of it doesn't have to be your own experience. You can learn from the experience of others, from people like me. So today I want to share with you some hard truths. And like I said, I want you to remember this talk long after you walk out of this room. Make those notes. You'll come back to this one day. And when you do, maybe I'll be on my front porch rocking away or something, and you can send me a little email and say you were right or you were wrong, either way. I wish I'd known these truths as I started out to work. Pool, hairdo, and all. I wish that I had known these things. These are the unspoken rules, the insider information about what it's like to navigate this path and truly succeed at work. So, there are 3 things I want you to know about today that you become a master in if you're going to crush your career. First of all, people who crush their career are masters at navigating relationships. That may sound somewhat obvious. Okay, I'm going to make a statement here, and I want it to sink in with you for just a moment. I want you to think about this. All of the most important decisions about your career will be made when you're not in the room. Have you thought about that? All the most important decisions about your career will be made when you're not in the room. You won't be in the room when they decide whether or not to select you. You won't be in the room when they make a decision to promote you or not. You won't be in the room when they decide to select you for a career-changing project or team. You won't be in the room when they've decided that you've reached your peak. You won't be in the room when the client decides whether they're going to order from you or someone else. You will not be in the room. That's actually a very sobering thought. And so the implication is clear. If you're not going to be in the room, then you need an advocate who's in the room for you. And to have that, you'll have to be a master at navigating relationships. It's your relationships with others that are going to determine ultimately how far you're going to go. And I know you know this already because I've met with enough students today that you've learned, help me out with what you call it here. Where's Reagan? Reagan, the 2-minute drill? Oh, thank you, the 2-minute drill. I've heard it from you all. I call it an elevator pitch, but you all already know how important this is. Let me tell you the story about Rick. Rick came to Chick-fil-A right out of college. And from the minute he arrived on our campus, he made an immediate impact. He was genuine, he was a problem solver, and he had a very natural and authentic desire to add value to everyone he interacted with. It didn't matter if it was the custodial staff or the executives, he added value everywhere he went. And the conversations around Rick when he wasn't in the room were glowing. And as a result, as a fairly young manager, he was given an opportunity to lead a huge project and solve a big problem. He was tasked with reinventing distribution logistics for Chick-fil-A. Now, if any of you are following what's going on in business, we know something. Distribution right now, and even your Amazon order, anything right now is sometimes tough to get, and distribution among retailers and restaurants is huge. And so he led the task of actually creating Chick-fil-A's own distribution center so that they didn't have to rely on others any longer. Other distributors were failing to get the products to the restaurants, and Rick was in charge of this initiative to solve the problem. And he threw himself into the role of building relationships with everybody involved, whether it was the franchisees, or it was the people in operations, or it was the people in supply chain. He worked on those relationships, and he ended up creating a state-of-the-art solution that's in use today. Now I want to contrast Rick with another employee, Jake. Jake was a young guy that I was charged with mentoring. And he had talent and he was clearly ambitious, but he lacked the self-awareness that he needed to build authentic relationships. So much so, he was so into the wrong direction that he literally bought a house in his boss's neighborhood and sent his children to the same private school as his boss. Now this became really obvious because when he started reporting to a different boss, he moved and bought a house in the new boss's neighborhood and sent his children to the new boss's children's school. I kid you not, this really happened. In addition to that, Jake liked to name drop about the executives he was having lunch with. And sometimes it was true, but other times his supervisors and other leaders knew that it was not true. The conversations around Jake when he was not in the room were not glowing. He was seen as calculating and manipulative, and he was not someone who could be trusted. And while he was given some good assignments, he never rose to the level of potential of what he could have actually done. And I don't think he ever reached the career aspirations that he expected, no matter how much I tried to coach him. So never underestimate the importance of relationships. Anybody that you're involved with, even those you might not think are important to your career. Are you familiar with Adam Grant, the author, organizational psychologist? Maybe you've been reading some of his books. I like the shape of my heads. I learned at lunch that you guys are reading a lot of books, which is impressive for college students. You're already ahead if you're doing that, because most college students only read what's required. So if you do something more, you're beating the competition with you're going to compete guys with. But Adam Grant said this: the most meaningful way to succeed is to help others succeed. One of my early leaders taught me this whole idea of abundance mentality, that there's enough for everybody. You know, the old saying, rising tides lifts all ships. And Brene Brown put it this way: we don't have to do it alone, we were never meant to. We're meant for relationship. And I like this one best. A friend of High Point University and leadership guru John Maxwell says this. This is simple. Don't forget this. If you walk out here and you don't remember anything else about what you do, continually add value to others in every interaction. When I was selecting franchisees and staff members at Chick-fil-A, there was something I would do after the interview. I did the final interviews for over 20 years with all of those people. I'm talking tens of thousands of people. And when I finished my interview, I would go downstairs and I would talk to the receptionist. And I would ask her how that candidate treated her. Did he or she treat her like she was an important part of our organization? Or as if she didn't matter? How did the candidate behave in front of the receptionist? Because I wanted to know if they fit into our culture of service. And if they treated everybody in the process, whether they thought they were part of the process or not, with honor, dignity, and respect. So never underestimate the importance of those relationships. And always look for ways to add value to others. Be yourself. That's important. Growing in your appreciation of others. And if you can, in every single interaction, whether somebody's below you, above you, the same level of you on the org chart, add value. Be sure to nip conflict in the bud. Don't burn bridges. I love this. Be a Rick, not a Jake. And every day ask yourself, in every interaction you have with people, I like to end conversations with people as, how can I help you? That's a great way to build relationships with people. How can I help you? If somebody shows up in your cubicle or your office or your dorm room, how can I help you? And you can bet when your name comes up in those conversations, when you're not in the room, the response will be met with resounding positivity. Okay, number 2, people who crush their careers are masters at navigating landmines. So here's another hard truth. And I hate to say it because, it's hard, but you need to know it. And that's that every career at some point or another will be met with a landmine of some kind. You can just count on it. It's a universal experience. In fact, I wrote a whole chapter to Crush Your Career about it because it happens. And it's important that we learn early on how to navigate these landmines so that we don't derail our careers. Some landmines we can see coming. Some we could have never guessed. I felt a lot like that in March of 2020. I had a 35-year career at that point. I thought I'd seen everything until we had a global pandemic. Sometimes you can't see things that are coming. For those we can anticipate, if we prepare ourselves, we can spot what's coming, we can deactivate that landmine, and keep on our path to achieving our goals. So during my career, one of the women I admired the most was a woman named Elizabeth. She was in charge of the legal real estate function at Chick-fil-A. She started the company after me, but she was a bit older than me. And I always appreciated her calm demeanor and her kindness towards everyone. She was extraordinarily consistent in every single thing she did. But as her career went on, it became clear that her managers felt like she had reached her peak. And she wasn't given high-level executive training or new big projects. She had been somewhat dismissed and set aside. And at times, I'm sure she probably felt rejected. Well, how did she respond to this? With that same calm demeanor and quiet confidence that had made her successful. This ongoing kindness with others and more likely to continue in progress and succeed in your career. Okay, so this brings me to my third point. People who crush their careers are masters at self-development. Now I'm going to show you another. And when a very big opportunity presented itself, she was ready and she was chosen. Her focus on competency and her ability to attract followers, because that's what leaders are, people who attract followers, and grow meaningful relationships propelled her to the executive team at Chick-fil-A. She was the first woman on the executive committee at Chick-fil-A, someone who had been previously dismissed, but she overcame that with resilience. She overcame the landmine of rejection with resilience. And I'm also reminded of one of my employees, Tasha. Tasha was an outstanding employee. She was well-liked. She was a star. And both within my own department and then across departments within the organization. During one team meeting of the organization she served within our company, something she did was misinterpreted. It was really unfair. This is one of those landmines she couldn't have seen coming. It was unfair. And the senior leader misinterpreted that, and he asked that I remove her from his team. I was devastated because I knew, first of all, that it was misinterpreted. Secondly, she was so great for his team. When I asked Tasha about it, she was equally as incredulous and horrified by it. And unfortunately, due to company politics, and that happens, that's one of the landmines we hit, I had no choice. I had to make the change. But Tasha responded remarkably well, with a teachable spirit. She went to school on herself. She really examined what had happened, why it happened, how she could do it differently. She asked for feedback for others. And she was certain that she wouldn't allow a misunderstanding like that to happen again. And fortunately, I was able to give her another assignment, a really big job. She's a great leader in the organization today. You know, landmines will come your way. So the implication is clear. It's how you respond to those landmines, even the unexpected ones, that will determine what happens. So first, respond to landmines with a teachable spirit. Just like Tasha did. She took a good look inside. What do I need to learn about myself in these circumstances? What do I need to learn about others? What do I need to understand about organizational dynamics and internal politics? You know, this is a great time if you find yourself caught in that, is to enlist a coach. To find somebody who can help you understand what happened. So you'll do things differently next time. And also respond to landmines with resilience. Keep showing up like Elizabeth did. Competently doing your job and not letting that landmine sidetrack you. You remember Rudy? He applied many times. He worked for 10 years before he got his break. But he didn't give up. He responded with teachability and resilience. And eventually he was given that chance to operate his own Chick-fil-A restaurant. Rejection is hard to take, isn't it? We've all been there. We've all been rejected at some point. But if you allow it to define you, then your influence is going to be rejected. But if you respond with teachability and resilience, you'll be far more likely to continue your progress and succeed in your career. Okay, so this brings me to my third point. People who crush their careers are masters at self-development. Now I'm going to show you another hard truth, and this may be the hardest one yet. You and your skills are a commodity on the open market. Now there's some exceptions right now. There are a few career fields that are wide open because there's a shortage of staff. But in a lot of areas it's true, and it's a harsh statement. When you're selected for a job, your employer wants to see a return on investment. And believe me, you want to be a good investment. Now, on one hand, I believe you have intrinsic value simply on the basis of the fact that you're a human being. And yet, as someone who evaluated talent for a large organization for decades, I realize you also have a market value based on your skills and your competence and your work ethic. You're either becoming more valuable every day to your employer or you're not. So the implication of that is clear too. You have to be the champion of your own self-development. I used to have the president of Chick-fil-A used to tell me all the time, he said, this is a do-it-yourself world. You know, oftentimes we're looking for what is somebody else going to do for us. What career ladder can you show me? What path can you show me? When am I going to get promoted? When am I going to get a raise? How are you going to develop me? But the truth is we have to be responsible for that ourselves, be our champion of our own self-development. So I think about Manuel. Manuel is a colleague of mine in another company, and he's head of leadership development. He's the author of a dozen books, and he's influenced and reached millions of people. But what a lot of people don't know about Manuel is he started his career as an hourly associate in one of the company's retail outlets. And from there he moved to positions like in the warehouse and mailroom and numerous other positions before he ended up being the head of training and development for the company. But there was something that just really stood out to me about Manuel and how he grew. How did he do that? How did he go from being an hourly associate to being one of the top leaders in this large company? Well, he was incredibly intentional about his own self-development. We were talking about he read the books. He was always quoting books and top thinkers when he was in meetings and attending numerous conferences and training all the time, sometimes on his own dime because the company wasn't necessarily funding it. But along the way, his knowledge and skill sets and abilities became more and more valuable to the organization. So much so that he inspired a culture in his organization that valued self-development, and they made him head of training and development. People who crush their careers are committed to continuous learning. I call it their lifelong learners. Now, some of you are part of organizations or will be part of organizations whose missions are around training and development. There's three things your generation wants. You want a remarkable culture, you want to be a part of something bigger than yourself, and you want your organization to grow and develop you and give you those opportunities. And some of you will have that opportunity because organizations are getting smarter and they're going to offer it to you. And if they do, take all the classes, the training seminars, the mentoring opportunities. It's worth taking time away from your job and maybe even an inconvenience to your personal life to help build your market value. About 20 years into my career, I was offered this incredible opportunity to go to this long-term executive education course at Harvard Business School. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The problem was I had 3 small children at home, and I was going to be gone for 10 weeks, which is an eternity. It's eternity for mom. It's a real eternity for those little kids. And because my boys are my greatest treasure in life, I really hesitated about that decision. But my husband and I talked about it, and we worked out the details, and we realized that it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that really would grow me in my career. And, you know, besides getting the best executive education, it really set me up to grow to the highest levels of the organization. So I decided to take that course. I'm sorry, I got so excited I missed a slide there, but anyway. It was I realized how fortunate I was to be able to take advantage of that. You know, on the other hand, I'm also aware that some of you are going to go to organizations that aren't smart about that yet. They're not going to realize how important it is to invest in you, or they're going to have limited budgets, or they're going to tell you they can't do that this year. For whatever reason, I would encourage you in that situation to use your own resources to invest in yourself. Read the books that will make you better at your job. Take a continuing education class. Upskill with online courses and master classes. Listen to the podcast. Obtain a certification. Find yourself a mentor. Do all of those things because every dollar spent in your own development is a dollar well spent. Henry Ford said, anyone who stops learning is old, whether this happens at 20 or 80. And anyone who keeps on learning not only becomes young, but becomes constantly more valuable. Investing in yourself raises your market value. That's probably the second thing to remember. Investing in yourself raises your market value. Take responsibility for your own development and growth. And invest in yourself by all the resources available to you. Some cost money and some just cost your time. You're investing in yourself right now by being here. This university, and I'm on a lot of college campuses. I've had 3 children go to college, and I've also been on a lot of college campuses. I think you have more opportunities than any place I can think of to grow and develop yourself in other ways while you're here, besides just what you get in the classroom. It's one of the worthiest investments that you can make to crush your career. So these are the 3 truths that I wish I had known when I started out that I just told you about today. People who crush their career are masters at developing, are masters in developing relationships, navigating relationships. I wish I'd known that. I wish I'd known that all the important decisions about my career were going to be made when I was in the room, because if I had known that earlier, I'd been more intentional about developing those relationships. And people who crush their careers are masters at navigating landmines. I wish I had known that all careers are going to face a landmine at one time or another, because if I had, I would have appreciated the need to navigate those landmines with resiliency and teachability earlier in my career. And I wish I'd known the importance of self-development, that my skill set was a commodity in a definable in the market value. If I'd done this, I would have appreciated the need to invest more, faster, earlier in my career. Now, eventually I did learn these things, and I learned it before it was too late. I did learn the importance of navigating relationships, landmines, and self-development. And you know what? There's more to this story about Rudy Martinez, too. He did take the poorest performing restaurant in the chain. Now, some of you might be thinking, if you're not familiar with Chick-fil-A, you might be thinking this story about Rudy is not real significant. So let me explain to you. So Chick-fil-A, I went there, there's 150 restaurants, $175 million in revenue per year. Today it's $15 billion with about 2,700 restaurants. The average restaurant does $5 million in average. So that means, I'm not quoting this, by the way, from Chick-fil-A. I'm doing my own math to tell you this. That probably means the average operator makes about $500,000 for a single restaurant. Some operators do business of $10, $12, $13 million in a single restaurant. About 600 of these operators operate 2, and a handful operate 3. So just wanted to give you context for the opportunity that Rudy actually had. He did take the poorest performing restaurant, and twice winning that Symbol of Success Award, but he didn't stop there. When his restaurant repeated its exponential sales that I told you about before, those profits for a 3rd year, he was offered a new and a better restaurant. And it was all because Rudy had become a master of these 3 things in his career, of navigating relationships, of navigating landmines, and navigating his own self-development. He looked to add value to every relationship that he encountered. He responded to adversity, even though it took him 10 years to fulfill his dream, with resiliency and teachability and gratitude. He took the path of continually self-developing himself. In fact, it was so important to him, and he knew that his poor English skills held him back for a few years, that what Rudy does now is he provides English as a second language to his employees so that won't hold them back. Every day he helps his teammates crush their own career by offering these opportunities. After his 2nd restaurant started setting records, he was offered a freestanding restaurant in his original home in the U.S., in McAllen, Texas. And just a few months ago, he sent me a text to let me know that he was opening his 3rd Chick-fil-A restaurant. Rudy Martinez is one of the top franchisees in the Chick-fil-A chain. And he started at the lowest volume restaurant in the entire chain. He runs 3 highly profitable restaurants. Rudy Martinez crushed his career. And I know that you can crush yours too.